Lazy piece of freaking trash. Oh god, I'm so glad that's over with. What the heck? Alright. Hi, I'm Garrett, and this is C4 Scope. And today I will be reviewing one of the worst horror movies ever made, The Gallows. The Gallows was a movie that came out in 2015 and was directed by two people, Travis Clough and Chris Loffing. Usually that's not a good sign when you have two directors, because it typically feels like there's going to be a lot of creative problems there. It was a movie that was marketed as going to be the next big slasher film, and that's about it. It came out, made a decent amount of money in the box office, had a budget of about $100,000, made I think over $22 million box office total, which isn't bad for a movie that was, only made for under $500,000. So that's pretty good. But you can typically expect that with found footage films, which this movie most definitely is. The plot of the movie is sort of like a culmination of every other horror movie that was ever made and then just meshed together to make this monstrosity. It's as if the directors sat down and then just watched a marathon of horror movies and took an aspect from each and every one of them. Because you can count it off the top of your hands. This movie is The Blair Witch Project, Friday the 13th, Strangers, Paranormal Activity, which the producers that worked on that movie, and also Insidious, worked on this movie, which I find really hard to believe because Paranormal Activity was a landmark found footage film. This is not. Insidious is one of the greatest horror movies ever made. In my opinion, this movie is one of the worst I've ever seen. So, really, none of it's meshing well. None of this should be happening, and yet this is. The plot of the movie basically goes as there was a kid at this high school play. He was playing some person that was supposed to get hanged in this play that's actually called The Gallows, and there was a malfunction in the prop. I guess the prop gallows that somehow was able to actually hang someone. He dies. 20 years later, they're redoing the play for some reason. Basically, there's four main characters. There's Reese, there's Brian, there's Cassidy, and there's Pfeiffer. Or, as I like to call them, forgettable, and most forgettable. Each one of them, I'll get to them in a second. Basically, Reese, Brian, Cassidy decide to, for whatever reason, I guess to stop the play from happening, is to break into the school at night, sabotage the play, make sure it can't really happen. But then they get caught up. Apparently the Pfeiffer chick showed up there. It doesn't really make any sense. But now there's four kids and they're trying to leave the high school, but all the doors are locked. And then all this spooky shit starts happening. And then every so often a killer shows up, kills one of them. And then by the end of the movie, it's basically over. Spoiler alert, everyone basically dies, I guess. That's The Gallows! No, but seriously, I'm doing something a little bit differently than I do with my normal critiques, where I just rip into the movie all at once, or I talk about everything overall in a culmination review, sort of like I did with Return of the Living Dead. But with this movie, I figured I should try out this new format where I basically talk about the good and I talk about the bad. Starting with the good first, which is really hard to do. But I made a list. I made a little list here. The good in this movie is, I'd probably say, the opening scene isn't half bad. And I mean, like, the scene where they're basically showing you what happened to the Charlie character. That's what I forgot to mention in the plot summary, was There's the killer's name is Charlie. He was the kid that got hanged, so I guess it's like his ghost that's coming back and killing everybody. Um, that scene wasn't bad because I honestly didn't expect when the drop was gonna happen. Like you expect the kid that's got a freaking noose around his neck in a horror movie to die, but it came at me and I didn't really expect it to happen. And apparently, from what I've researched, that the directors were setting up this fake play and they were letting the actors act it out, but they were not telling them. They didn't inform them about the scripted part where the person falls and supposedly hangs. So it actually looked, or everybody thought, that he had actually hung. So everybody was really freaking out. Everybody was really screaming. It was pretty good. It was a pretty good creepy setup that was not really carried out well throughout the rest of the film. But not talking about that. Talking about the good. Moving on. Okay, here we go. Sometimes the atmosphere and perspective is actually really effective. One thing that I've noticed when watching this movie is that the the high school setting has been done before. The creepy theater setting has been done before. Even like the high school theater setting, like you can make an argument that the theater horror monster thing was done with Phantom of the Opera. You can even argue that the horror high school play thing was already done in countless other films, like Phantom of the Opera play or whatever that Goosebumps episode was. But sometimes they actually do manage to really give you eerie scenes. They have a lot of scenes that I think are sometimes effective at building suspense. And the found footage is actually used very effectively sometimes. Sometimes with found footage films, it's always creepiest when you're put in someone's perspective. So whenever someone gets lost from the main group and we're like in their perspective, sometimes it works there. Sometimes they actually do kind of start churning an emotional fear feeling out of me. Not always, but I can at least commend the movie for having done that at least. Gosh, was there anything else? Was there really anything else I liked about this movie? No, I guess that's it. Nothing else that was really that great about the movie, or at least nothing that I thought was that stand out great. So I guess this now leads us into the bulk of this video, the bad. Oh boy. Alright, I guess the first thing I should start off with is the characters are awful. We don't get to know anybody in this movie. Like, we know no one, personally. We know their names, we know what little stereotypes that they're supposed to fill out, but throughout this movie, all they are is just templates. They're just templates. Like, this is this character, this is what this character is supposed to be, or whatever, and you don't really know them. That's typical for horror movies, I guess, but it just feels so much more less here. Like, there's just so much less about these characters. You know nothing about their motivations outside of maybe a sentence or two on one motivation. That doesn't really even define the character. Their personalities are flat, just awful. Honestly, the entire time it's just like watching paper cutouts. I honestly can't say anything good about the characters. Any of them. Like, none of them really do anything for me. The Reese character is, like, okay, I guess. Like, he's sort of the main character, but not really. Just because of the way they center the focus doesn't really make you feel that way. But even then, he's not that good. And a lot of that comes from my next complaint, which is actually the acting. The acting falls under, oh my god, I'm cringing to death category. Like, it's so bad. It's so bad. There's not a single time in this movie where a character says a piece of dialogue that I genuinely believe, that I genuinely think they mean. And none of it comes out. None of it comes out as if they're actually in danger either. It's some of the most flat acting you will ever see. A lot of these people in this movie, this was like one of their first movies. It was the director's first movies too, but I mean, when you have actors that have no idea what they're doing, it shows. It shows so badly. And not just the lines of dialogue either. Like, their lines of dialogue are really corny and they don't come off like they mean it, but their looks, the expressions they have on their face, are some of the most derpy looking faces ever. Like when they see or they hear footsteps off in the distance, they look down this long passing hallway. It's just it's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen in my life. Um, it just doesn't come off as very believable. It's honestly not the worst part about this movie because I've seen worse acting. I've seen horror movies where the acting is just fuck. Uh, but in this movie, I mean, like for most horror movies, it's pretty customary for that. You know, it's pretty customary to have bad acting. I'm not saying every horror movie has bad acting, and I'm not even saying that every bad horror movie, has bad acting. I'm just saying that, like, typically speaking, bad acting exists in horror movies. The plot is the most contrived thing I've ever seen in my life. I have never, in my life, like I love slasher films, so I love paying attention to the backstory of the killers because that's what I'm most interested in these movies. When I hear this one and I hear the plot that they got going on here, I just can't get with it. It makes no sense. So, you mean to tell me that the character died accidentally, literally nobody's fault, and wants revenge? Okay, what is who's he gonna get revenge on? Apparently, the Reese character is the son of the actor that was actually supposed to play the person that was gonna get hung in the original play, but he called out sick, so now Charlie has to be he was the understudy, so now he has to be the guy that gets hung. And then of course the accident happened, and it wouldn't have been Charlie. Well, okay, I mean somebody still would have died. How do you know? I mean, even if it wasn't Charlie that got killed, how do we know it wouldn't have been this guy? He probably had a girlfriend. He probably had family that he wanted to be with. What's the likelihood that he wouldn't have become a ghost and killed kids too? That part just doesn't really make sense to me. It seems like a lot of the plot points in this plot are literally there just to force things along, just to move things along. Like, there's so many inconsistencies. The killer, you have no idea why he doesn't just kill the kids. Like, he has the power. He's a ghost. He can kill these kids. But he doesn't do it right away. He waits the entire movie picking them off one by one as if he's someone like Michael Myers who wasn't a ghost. He had no choice but to kill people off one by one because he was a normal freaking person. This guy is a ghost. He doesn't have to wait. But why? Why does he wait? Because it's convenient for the plot. That's all it is. It is literally the most unflowing narrative I have ever seen in a while. I thought the cinematography in this movie was going to give me a freaking aneurysm. Like, I'm not joking. The cinematography in this movie is the most distracting thing I've ever seen in my life. Aside from the fact that it's a found footage film, which I'm not entirely a huge fan of, but not so discriminatory towards it that I would just not appreciate the art at all. But with this movie, it's awful. I swear more than a third of the shots in this movie are literally just shots of nothing but darkness with the camera literally pressed up against something. Or a shot of people's feet. People's shoes. Because Lord knows, I love watching a movie where I can't see what's happening. I mean, like, half the time, it's, like, you know how in found footage films, we have, like, the character with moving the camera all over the place, or they're being attacked, so the camera's, like, down here or something, and they're trying to, like, defend themselves or whatever. In this movie, they literally have scenes where no action is happening whatsoever, and the camera will just be pointed down. That is the most infuriating thing ever, because in a horror movie, you should show me stuff so that I don't want to see it. You shouldn't not show me stuff so that I ask to see it. That's the exact opposite of the way it should work. And when they do stuff like that, it really shows me that this movie shouldn't have been a found footage film, because they don't incorporate any of the elements or techniques, at least to the fullest of their potential, that found footage films use in horror movies. Like I said, pointing their freaking camera at the ground when no action is happening just basically means that I guess the camera crew didn't want to make a shot of something there, so they just pointed it at the ground. It doesn't work story-wise either, because of the fact that with something like Blair Witch, it made sense why they were filming. They were filming because they were making a documentary on the Blair Witch. Here, it's just high school kids with some cameras. Like, one or two. And that's our whole movie? Honestly, it would have made more sense to just have a camera crew filming the place and it not be found footage. That's what I would have liked to see, because that means that a lot of these really distracting shots, and I promise you, I'm not joking when I say 33.33% of the shots in this movie are nothing but shots of the ground or darkness for no other reason other than they just didn't feel like filming something, didn't feel like wasting space on something that obviously isn't going to scare you anyway. On top of those really annoying, distracting shots where nothing is really happening and your attention is being averted to something like my feet that doesn't really matter at all, you also have a whole bunch of shots layered on top of that, laced throughout the entire film, of 2 to 3 second shots where something is happening, but it has nothing to do with anything. Nothing at all. The Brian character actually sits down in front of the camera and is about to explain what they're about to do, what the plan is. He literally, first few words of his sentence is interrupted by his mom, gets up, and then just the video cuts. It cuts to the next scene. What was the point of that? If the point was you were originally just going to actually explain something to us and be like, alright, here's the plan, guys, but then totally just cut it off, why even show it at all? Was it for comedy? Was his mom accidentally walking in on him, filming himself, really that bad? Was it really so funny? Did the test groups really think it was that funny that it should just get that scene all to itself? Because that scene has no other purpose. None whatsoever in the rest of the film. You could argue that other 5 second long scenes have something to do later on in the movie, but this and some others very similar to this have zilch to do with it. And it is it's infuriating because it doesn't make any sense. And also because it's a found footage film, it's quite customary that someone get this close to the camera and start crying. Blair Witch did it. Why doesn't this movie do it too and become a masterpiece? Another thing that really upsets me about the cinematography that really ties into the storytelling of this film is that too many times there's something that happens, and instead of showing you what happens, they wait and then explain to you what just happened, rather than show us what happened. A scene that is a perfect example of that is when I think the Brian character, he's like climbing a ladder and he flies off the ladder and he lands on the ground and he breaks his leg. But they don't show you that. They don't show you he broke his leg yet. They clearly show him, like they have the ability to show him. He's writhing on the ground in pain. He's freaking out. Everybody's freaking out around him. Reese and Pfeiffer run out of the room to go get some first aid or something. And while they're running to go get first aid, Pfeiffer's like, oh my god, he broke his leg. And it's like, seriously? Seriously? Why couldn't you just show me that? Why did you literally have to tell me he broke his leg? Because I didn't see what happened? Yeah, I didn't see what happened because you didn't show it. That's a big issue I have with this film, is that too many times do they just not flat out show you what is in front of you and instead explain it to you. I don't watch movies to have someone talk to me, to have someone like say with words what's happening as opposed to visually showing me. And they don't stop there. It's not enough for the movie to only tell you stuff and not show you anything. They have to do the exact opposite, where they just show you something but then don't explain at all what it was. There has to be a balance. Or at the very least, you can tell me through showing me. In this movie, they don't do that at all. There's so many scenes where they show you something, expect you to know what it is or understand it, and then just totally not reference it, talk about it, even some of the characters don't even talk about it. So it's like, what was that supposed to mean? What am I supposed to get from that? Like, for instance, there's a scene where the Ryan character is off by himself. He's separated from the group, and he looks up and he sees this dead body hanging from the ceiling. To the audience, it's clearly a dead body, but it's hidden in shadow, so we don't know whose dead body it is. Brian, I don't even think he understands it's a dead body, so he just walks away like nothing happened. I go up on the internet later only to find out that that dead body was supposed to be the night shift janitor. The janitor we saw for 5 seconds earlier. How were we supposed to know that? How was that supposed to be any at all prevalent to us? There was literally nothing to suggest other than maybe a second-long scene where he was like, is the janitor still here? oh, that dead body up there must be the janitor, even though there's literally nothing to indicate that that is the truth. I mean, like, I mean, like, the internet said it was, so I obviously have to believe it. But the fact that the movie drew attention to something like that, only to really not do anything with it. There was no huge scare that came out of it. It was eerie for like a second, but then when nothing was done with it, it just dropped. The part of the movie that's the most guilty about doing something like that is actually the very end of the movie, where they totally abandon explaining anything at all and just throw shit in your face and expect you to be like, okay, this is a satisfying ending, I guess. But in reality, it's not. It's the most lazy ending I've seen in a horror movie in a while, where literally I don't even want to interpret it because the filmmakers don't want to interpret it. They just threw stuff at the screen. We're like, here's your explanation, here's your answers. Oh well, we don't really care. So why should I care? Getting to the actual horror part of this horror movie review, we have some of the most just uneventful scares ever. Like, these are some of the most borrowed, copied things I've seen in a long time. You can basically predict almost every single scare. And even when it does finally scare you, it only lasts for like 5 seconds and then totally just ignores it. Keeps going until we get to the next incident. Like I said earlier when I was talking about the story, this movie has no flow to it. There's no solid transitions. Everything just happens and it's just forced along. It is just pushed along by its own self. Even the scares that it does copy, they don't really go all the way with them. It's like they'll show you something gruesome, or they'll show you something that's like kind of like a freak out jump scare for a second, but then cut right back away from it. Like, they don't really want to scare their audience. Like, they don't really want to like get people out of the seats. They want to try their best to keep people in here, but even then, it's not like your scares were that scary to begin with. So why tone it down at all? And I don't mean like just scares in general or what's affected by that. I mean like even when it's trying to build suspense. Like I said earlier, this movie actually does build good suspense. But the problem is that it'll build that good suspense only to have ruined it maybe 5 seconds later with a really dumb expression across one of the actors' face. So it fails in that department. My absolute biggest issue with about 97% of the scares in this movie are that a lot of them are centered, and I mean a lot of them are centered around the camera or one of the characters focusing on something in a room, making sure that attention is at least drawn to it, turning attention away from it, focusing on something else, only to turn back and notice that the thing that was you focused on earlier has either been moved slightly or totally gone from the room altogether. I promise you, 97% of it is like that. You will not see a single scene where something isn't taken away or put back in. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I mean, like, if I were to take the Gallows DVD here and just chuck it, and then the very next shot, turn around and, oh, look, it's back. Or if I were to take my water bottle, slightly move it over here a little bit, turn my attention away from it, only to cut back and see that it had suddenly moved back to where it was, or it had moved to a different location altogether. That's what I mean. That's literally what the entirety of the movie is basically centered around. And that's something utilized in found footage films, but here they overplay it. This is the one thing that they overplay to the maximum, and it gets so tired so fast. Literally, you're waiting for every other scene to come along and just have something move that wasn't supposed to have moved or whatever, and it's just tiring. It's literally it's waiting. You're more waiting to see if the movie's gonna do something different. You actually it happens so often in the film. I actually found myself wondering if in this scene this thing was gonna move, or if in this scene this thing was gonna move. So I actually started playing a game with myself because the movie was really doing it that often. Okay, so my last complaint with this film is actually the character that was played up the most in the trailers and all the advertisements, and that's the killer, the Charlie character. This guy was played up big time in the trailers. I think what had happened was, according to my research, was that they played the trailers, just like normally, like it wasn't played up as like a slasher movie or anything like that. I guess just like as a normal horror ghost story or whatever. And then, of course, it didn't really do that well, so they were like, all right, let's try and play up this Charlie guy we got in here. We got ourselves a sort of slasher villain with a sort of cool concept, so let's do our best to center the marketing around him and hopefully get more asses in seats. And what ended up happening? I still remember the trailers to this day. In those trailers and all those advertisements, they were saying that he was going to be the next Jason Voorhees, that he was going to be the next Freddy Krueger. And I'm just like, now after seeing it, I'm just like, are you serious? Are you kidding me? The next Jason Voorhees? Bullshit. I call bullshit. And the reason I call that is because, one, you barely see the guy. Yeah, in a movie where literally all you saw in the trailers was this guy, you never see him in the movie. You maybe see him in like full scale, clearly bright as day, see him, not in the shadows, for maybe a minute and a half of screen time. Total. And I'm not exaggerating. I went through the whole movie basically like tallying up how many times you see this guy, and it probably matches out to maybe 5 times. It's not that much. And in comparison to something like Jason Voorhees, he is the standout star because he's on screen all the time, always doing something. With Charlie, you barely see him. How is he supposed to be the standout star when I can barely even remember what he looks like? Even then, when you do see what he looks like, it looks terrible. It doesn't look like anything stand out. It doesn't look like any kind of unique costume. I mean, with someone like Jason or Freddy, they had really character-defining characteristics aesthetically about them. This guy has nothing. This guy, at most, has the noose, which is kind of cool, but it's also kind of stupid. And then he has a burlap sack over his head. A sack. Because Lord knows, I haven't seen enough slasher films where a killer wears a sack over his head. I mean, it blows my mind that they actually were trying to pass this off as being the next big Friday the 13th franchise. Like, this was going to be the slasher villain of our generation. And it failed miserably. How dare they think that you can just give somebody a backstory, a mask, and some signature weapon and say, that's your next Jason Voorhees, that's your next Michael Myers, that's your next Leatherface. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't happen automatically, and you definitely cannot start saying that they're in that same level. A major failure, and this is like the biggest failure, is that because of the fact that we can't really see him, we don't really see him that often, we don't know anything about him. Like, we know his backstory, we know what he did, but we know nothing of what he's like. We don't know any of his mannerisms. We don't know how he interacts with just the world around him by himself or with anybody from his perspective. He has no definable personality. And that's honestly a shame because you look at someone like Freddy Krueger, who obviously has a very fun personality. I mean, he's a killer, but I mean, he's funny about it. He makes jokes. He does stupid things. He laughs, you know. He jokes around. Jason, he's a silent killer, but he still has a personality. He's aggressive, you know. He kills kids that do drugs, teenagers that have sex. Not only do you not know anything about his personality because of what little screen time he gets, his motivation is really confusing too. I don't know why he's killing these kids. Think about it. If you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. So he's going after the Reese character, right? Okay, so he wants revenge on the dad that wasn't there to get killed in his place? Okay, so if that's the case, why kill anybody else? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Which, maybe someone would argue and say that, oh, well, it wasn't just to get revenge, he wanted to see the play continue. Okay, if that was the case, why did he murder them? Why did he murder all the kids if he just wanted... One, why did he murder everyone else if he just wanted Reese? Why did he murder them at all if he just wanted to see the play continue? If you murder these kids and just put them in the fucking theater, nobody's going to want to be there. They're going to be like, oh my god, it happened again. Another tragic accident has gone down at the Gallows play. So it really comes off as like they didn't know which route they wanted to take. They didn't know if they were trying to make a sympathetic character for Charlie, or they didn't know if they were trying to make a really like angry, revengeful kind of guy. It seems like they just couldn't really come to a middle ground on that, and it really clashes. It clashes so bad. Another thing is that in horror movies, especially slasher films, and even more especially with supernatural slasher films, they make it a point to establish some sort of rules where we can understand what the killer is capable of, what the killer can do, what he can't do. And with this movie, they didn't really do a good job of that. Because obviously Charlie's a ghost, okay? He often appears in and out of rooms. He goes basically wherever he wants. He can make things appear. I mean, he's invisible sometimes, I guess. Okay, cool. We got a ghost killer. But then you have other scenes where he's chasing them. He's chasing them and they escape him by locking a door in his face. And he actually is banging on it. Was this guy a ghost that can go into whatever room he wants, or is he now a actual kind of solid person and is inhibited by a door? So it really seems like they just didn't know what they wanted to do with the character. It seems like they just didn't know what direction they wanted to take him in terms of motivation, in terms of characteristics. It really seemed like a missed opportunity. It really seemed like a jumbled mess of an idea. The concept wasn't bad for a character like this, but they really didn't play it up. They didn't really live up to what they were playing up in the advertisements. And that basically leads me to my conclusion on The Gallows. It's awful, guys. This has to be one of the most underwhelming movies you'll see in a while, if you actually do go see it, which I recommend you don't go see it. This is a movie that honestly does nothing new for the genre. Basically copies every major cliche or stereotype from every other horror film, so it's not unique at all. The cinematography, like I've said, is just annoying. It films it in a way that just makes it not scary. The characters are annoying. They're stupid. The actors don't really act that well. I'm sorry. Even the Charlie character is just a letdown. He's basically just another template. He's basically another paper cutout. And all in all, the movie just it really has no substance. There's nothing here of any cinematic value. I can't really look at this movie and say that there's really anything that it does that I think makes it stand on its own. There's maybe one or two scenes where it has something happen that's entirely its own and is entirely unique to it, but it happens so quickly and is so ineffective, has so little impact on the rest of the film that it overall just doesn't really add up to much. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this review. I certainly did, ripping into this movie. Tell me what you think about the new format, and if you have any of your own opinions, please share them down in the comments below. Have a happy Halloween, and I'll see you in November.